AM radio, an op-ed column, and Fox News is not enough. I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. AM radio is the lowest form of communication. It's tinny, it's not robust, it's not Avatar. I want Avatar. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does.
The fake media is trying to silence us, but we will not let them, because the people know the truth. The fake media tried to stop us from going to the White House, but I'm president and they're not.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast, a Breitbart.com podcast. The podcast starts now. Here's Curt with today's headlines.
Good morning, guys. Welcome to another edition of the Curt Schilling Podcast. Got a great show lined up today. Ian Mason from Breitbart, who was on the ground in D.C. yesterday, basically giving us exposing us to the modern-day KKK that is now known as Antifa. If anything, they define what the KKK was. And yesterday they showed us in many, many examples who they were. We're going to have Ian on to talk about that, and John Hayward from National Security at Breitbart is going to join us as well. But first, we're going to get to the sound bites and listen to the lunacy of the left. On MSNBC Sunday, KCDC host Casey Hunt posed the question to a panel, and so understand this. I've said time and time again, the left is exactly who they claim to hate. They're going so far now as to act out certain things in public and then go on television and accuse Republicans of being the things and saying the things that they do. This protest, you saw what happened to Candace Owens last week. A black woman being hailed and heckled by all white people, booted out of a restaurant. But somehow, some way, the left has made the Republican Party the party of anti-black somehow. Listen to Casey Hunt pose the question. Listen to what these people, including former Republican National Committee Chair Michael Steele, has to say about this.
I won't know if I'll go that far yet. We have our roots, though. I mean, we have our roots when there was a Southern strategy from the Nixon campaign in '68 to bring into the fold this particular ilk of person, to put it politely, this kind of trash, because there was some electoral benefit, presumably, that would come from it. There was no consideration given to the poison that would infect the body politic within the GOP, that here we are now, some 50 years later, having to deal with a president, a Republican president, who, to the point that was just made, gives countenance to it, that gives room to that. So the party has to now, irrespective of the president, the party has to account for this. Because I don't know how we go into a black community, into a Hispanic community, and say, come, join us, be a part of us. It's not enough to say you're conservative. It's not enough to say you go to church on Sundays. It's not enough to put all that out there on the table anymore. When you've got this body of work by this administration, you've got the rhetoric and everything else that says something very different to communities of color in this country.
One of the things that we allow them to get away with, by them I mean the left, and the right does it too, they're allowed to generalize. And they do so without ever giving examples. Talking about the fact that the party has become anti-black. How do you defend that? By what? What have they done? What has President Trump done that has made the party anti-black? There's no examples. They just say it. They just say things like that without any support. I guarantee you, if you were to come back and say, oh, my God, what does that mean? How can you say that? They would be like, are you kidding me? He's done a million things without ever citing any factual event. They are that which they profess to hate. Anyway, Fox News, Trump 2020 senior advisor Katrina Pearson was on The Next Revolution responding to Omarosa, who is exactly who you knew she was when she went in. Listen to her respond to this.
I was often asked if Omarosa was anything like the lying, manipulative, backstabbing instigator, like the character that she played on TV. And my answer was always very simple. Omarosa doesn't play a character on TV. That's just who Omarosa is. I am sad to say that I'm shocked that I was even brought into this to begin with. But I will say, and if you've seen my statement from today, that is an absolute lie. In fact, the first that any of us ever even heard of this Apprentice tape was from Omarosa. She was the only one that ever talked about it during the campaign. So, of course, the rest of us were wondering what she was talking about. I reached out to those two individuals she mentioned in her interview today, to Jason Miller and to Lynn Patton. They both have no idea what she's talking about. So, sure, let's see those receipts. But I will also say that she's just trying to cover up for her own issues. She wrote this book, and so she has to be salacious, and she has to tell lies to make a buck. And I truly feel sorry for her. I'm not even angry. Clearly, she is in a desperate move to try and make money. But then what would you expect? What else could she possibly do at this point?
I know, that's exactly how it strikes me. I mean, you know, I've never met her, I don't know her at all, but she just strikes me as kind of like a sort of press release in human form. I mean, this is who she is. This is what she does. But you were there with her work. I mean, did you observe anything constructive or useful that she brought to her role?
I mean, Omarosa was always concerned about herself. Of course, she would play games with people. Many of us would just go along because we really just wanted her to stay out of the way. But I'll also say that, you know, she obviously did these things while she was in the White House. Several staffers have told me some of the things that I'm assuming John Kelly was referring to as far as her integrity. There were staffers who would put their phones on speakerphone just so everyone else in their offices could hear her ranting and berating them and screaming at them on the phones. There was another White House fellow woman that she made cry because she would belittle her and berate her daily, and she asked to be reassigned. But I think what really led up to the firing was a conference call that she was on with other professionals, and she was berating another African-American employee at the White House, unknowing who else was on the call, and they personally complained to John Kelly. And when she wasn't abusing staffers, Steve, she was misusing government resources. For example, using the White House car service as her personal Uber so she could go to restaurants and sporting events.
That's exactly what I would expect to hear from her. I think Trump made a huge mistake bringing her in, only because I had no idea what she was going to bring to the table. I mean, I didn't watch a lot of what I saw of her, but she didn't seem like someone who was going to bring that stuff to the table. I want you to listen to her, the Omarosa herself. She was on Meet the Press, Sunday's Meet the Press. I got to tell you, I was somewhat impressed that the host continues to push her about what she did as being disloyal, but listen to her explanation.
How is it? You recorded the chief of staff.
Absolutely.
The White House chief of staff in the Situation Room.
Yes.
And this takes place before the Christmas party.
In the Situation Room.
And you're prepared in a moment's notice to record him, or were you planning to record him the minute you found out you had this meeting?
Well, no. First of all, like I said, I'm the only African-American there. When you walk into a meeting with John Kelly, who's refused to meet with me the whole time he's there, in the Situation Room, Chuck, we're not going in there to talk about, you know, parking or scheduling issues.
You knew this was
We're going in there to talk about something very serious.
You prepared to tape.
I was prepared because, first of all, John Kelly had been very vocal about trying to find a reason to let me go. He had gone to the press instead of coming to me, never given me an opportunity to meet with him. So the question is, why not have the meeting in the Chief of Staff's office? Why put me in the Situation Room, lock the door, and tell me over and over again, as they'll hear, well, they'll hear his part, that I couldn't leave, that I couldn't consult an attorney, that I couldn't talk to my husband who was sitting outside of the door. Yes, I was prepared. And as you'll see in Unhinged...
How often did you tape people?
Wait, Chuck. As you'll see in Unhinged, I protected myself because this is a White House where everybody lies. The president lies to the American people. Sarah Huckabee stands in front of the country and lies every single day. You have to have your own back because otherwise you'll look back and you'll see 17 knives in your back.
It looks though
That's not disloyalty. That's not disloyalty because let me tell you, Chuck, if I did not have this recording, people would still believe the false incredible story that I was running around the White House, the false story that was told by a reporter and repeated by this network and other reporters, that I tried to charge the residents of the White House, and it's a lie. If I didn't have this recording, listen, people would still think trying to set off alarms. So yes, I had to protect myself, and I have no regret about it.
Of course she doesn't. She's exactly who you thought she was. And I think the real crime here that the woman never stepped foot in the White House to begin with. I'm going to bet that she did absolutely nothing in the last 18 months to help, or this woman did anything to help this country other than help herself. Anyway, you got to listen to the tape. Tape is very revealing as to what kind of person she is, and it kind of gives you some insight into what kind of person the general is, which is no bullshit. We're going to have Ian Mason on. Ian was on the ground at the rallies yesterday, and if you want to see what the KKK is morphed into, just take a look. The KKK is morphed into Antifa, and it's all of the rage. I posted something on my blog, a very telling picture that shows a young black woman being shouted down by white protesters in 1964, side by side with the Candace Owens being shouted down by white protesters in 2018, along with a picture of the Nazi brown shirts and their swastika flags right next to a bunch of Antifa members with their Antifa flags, which has its basis in the German flag as well. This is the dueling rallies in Washington yesterday and how CNN portrayed it.
Very large police presence, as you can see behind me. Some of these protesters are now kind of angrily chanting and yelling at police because we just saw this line of police officers kind of bolster their ranks here, and we saw some police motorcycles kind of rev their engines, so that kind of drew this crowd closer to the police, and now they're kind of just chanting and yelling things at police. No major flare-ups here yet, but again, these are some of the Antifa protesters. Some Black Lives Matter protesters are here. The Antifa protesters, the anti-fascist protesters, often show up wearing some of the garb that you see over here, black helmets, black gas masks, sometimes bandanas over their faces. And they sometimes kind of get into some of these confrontations with police. But so far here, Anna, not really much of a confrontation. It's just a lot of yelling. This is not atypical for a situation like this. We're hearing some chants here, and again, they're yelling at police. Police are just kind of holding their ground. Pretty commonplace for a situation like this. The white supremacist protesters were probably about 200 to 300 yards that way. And again, the police are not letting these people get anywhere near them. That's been a key factor here, keeping the distance between these anti-racist protesters and the white supremacists. They really have not been able to get close enough to maybe even be heard by them, even though the crowds here are much more numerous than the white supremacists. Anna.
The white supremacists. Did anybody see white supremacists? I didn't see. Maybe there was. I'm not saying there was. But I was under the impression that the original rally was called as defenders of the First Amendment. From everything I heard, it was like 25 people total on this rally that showed up that were quote-unquote white supremacists. I'm not even sure. I didn't see them, so I was more focused on what the left was trying to prevent. And it appears to me that they were, I don't know, it's up is down and down is up. The left is no longer the left. If you have any question, the left is gone fully socialist on us, which is fine. I just wish they'd admit it because it would be a lot easier. But if the stat that came out last week is even remotely true, and Trump's support among the black community has risen to 21%, we will never in our lifetimes again see a Democratic president. No chance. And I believe it. So there you go. We're going to take a short break. Ian Mason's going to join us after this. Ian was on the ground, and we're going to hear about the white supremacists that were apparently marching on Washington yesterday. Back in just a minute.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Why did we see some of the Republican kissing of Mark Zuckerberg that was taking place?
I called it kissing the ring because I felt like every single person practically had to kiss the ring of this guy, who wants to do nothing except get all those people out of office. So, bizarre behavior from the Republicans.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Joining me now from Breitbart is Ian Mason. You can follow him, by the way, on Twitter at IP_Mason, M-A-S-O-N. Morning, Ian. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's always a pleasure. I'm really curious to get get into a conversation with someone who was kind of boots on the ground yesterday in Washington, because as I was told by CNN, it was a massive white supremacist rally on D.C., countered by American-loving fascists on the left, and it was calmly and easily toned down by the police. Although the video I saw, Ian, was people on the left berating police officers of all races. There were about 20 people who I guess that the left was calling white supremacists. Can you tell the listeners here kind of exactly what happened and how it went with you?
Sure. So to start, the supposedly main rally, the Unite the Right to situation, I won't even call it a rally. I mean, it was really, we're talking about Jason Kessler and perhaps 24 people. It was not even a full Washington Metro car that the police had set up to bring them in from their little staging point. The point is, obviously, the activity, the supposedly counter activity, of which there were two real sort of counter protests. The I guess the sort of more mainstream liberal protest just outside the park in Lafayette Park, where Kessler and his friends were. That's sort of more the kind of crowds that you see in D.C. all the time. A lot of anti-Trump signs, a lot of abolish ICE signs, so on and so forth. And then you had a second group of maybe 80 to 100 people who were real hardcore Antifa types, all clearly coordinated, flags, black clothing, all masked, a lot of them with sticks, other weapons, kind of they're really ready to do violence. And you heard that. I mean, I was sort of mingling with that crowd for several hours, and I mean, people were very open about the fact that they were looking for I don't know, neo-Nazis to beat up. They were quite clear about that.
What was the left, the Antifa? What was the group that was Antifa? What was their? I mean, what did you get from what they were doing? What was their number one complaint, or what were they there in protest of?
Well, I think it's ostensibly it's there to counter protest the Jason Kessler and his rally, but in reality, I mean, they most of their slogans had absolutely nothing to do.
That's the point I was trying to make. They weren't there to protest the white supremacists. They were there to protest America.
Absolutely, and that's they are part of a pre-existing ideology that doesn't have much to do with Jason Kessler, to be perfectly honest, and they're rather open about it. I don't want to pretend like they really hide the ball. I mean, they are there's a bit of ideological diversity. They're either communists or anarchists or so forth, but they're very clear that they are opposed to all police officers, and that they're opposed to even their slogan yesterday suggested the existence of the United States as a whole, which is pretty consistent with their previous ideological statements. After the Kessler and his friends got let out of their pen, they went on a march around D.C., probably 8 or 9 sort of meandering blocks where they went around. They sort of confronted drivers and so forth to clear a route on the street. Shout all sorts of inflammatory. I know most of them are not printable slogans, but mostly without incident. Although right there at the end, you may have seen, I did a couple of videos. There was sort of a confrontational part of the crowd that did have to be pepper sprayed by police. No arrests as far as I saw, but a little bit of a confrontation there at the end.
Yeah, I saw the pepper spray, and it made me smile, unfortunately. Let me ask you, today and late last night, we heard the left painting their picture of this rally, and somehow, some way, MSNBC and a couple other news outlets were painting, out of this came the painting of the Republican Party as anti-black. I don't have any idea how that was something they got away from this, but I keep saying often, and I think we at Breitbart keep exposing, Ian, the left is the very thing they profess to hate. And it's very clear to me that that these people hate American values. They don't like what America is from a capitalism, a country driven by capitalism. I guess my question is, why would you live in a place you hate so much? You're free to leave. Or do they
well,
really think they're going to change this?
I don't want to speak for my Antifa friends here explicitly, but I think that the argument they would make is that they're here to overthrow the system. It's not a matter of them wanting to live in Mexico or in Canada or any other country. It's about trying to create a worldwide stateless, either anarcho-syndicalist system or a communist state, internationalist communist state. And now, I mean, I think it's important to note. I mean, this group that I'm talking about here, it's not as though everyone out here yesterday in Washington was part of this group. This is sort of, like I say, a separate sort of group that did kind of keep to themselves, and maybe 80 to 100 of them. And even within that group, this is one of the more sort of interesting anecdotes I saw during the day was at some point, as we've seen at other protests in the past, we had a small group of them start overturning trash bins in Washington. I don't know what it is about the Washington trash bins, but every protest, some of them seem to get turned over. And almost immediately, as soon as they hit the ground, there were a group of people without masks on, a couple with masks, but the one who sticks in my mind had no mask on, who immediately were very upset about it and sort of chastised their fellow protesters and started trying to clean up the mess that had been made. So even in that group, it's not as though everyone is on the same page in terms of tactics, and,
right.
and that is true. I mean, it wasn't even that. There were several disagreements.
Yeah.
At some point during the protest, I feel as though they were running out people that I don't know why they thought they were not on their side.
Ian, I don't know if you saw it, but I had to laugh. There's video out of the march where there's a Black Lives Matter group, and they're chanting and stating the fact that their march is going to be a police-free zone, as if somehow they get to dictate where and when the police are going to be and what kind of presence they're going to have. But they're literally chanting that they're going to have a police-free zone. And it just feels to me like they're living in a country that they aren't actually living in. Like they're not accepting reality because it's not what they want it to be. So they're intent on changing it. And then the fact of the matter is the not just starting last week, but last week's incident around Candace Owens really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that these people they don't like black conservatives. They don't like minorities that are conservatives. In fact, they look at those people as traitors to their race, traitors to their cause, in irrational ways that I just can't fathom. And I look at these people like Candace Owens as, my God, she's standing up for something that is not popular amongst her friends, and she's doing it with intelligence and fact. And the only thing that they can do is call her names.
I think that's right, and I think we saw yesterday the bar for treason in these groups is a lot lower than even being just a conservative. I mean, you saw there were several of them berating black police officers yesterday. I don't know how particular police officers in D.C. voted, but I would take it that the D.C. police force most likely has a lot of Democrats on it. I'll say that. It's not so much that they think that they're conservatives; it's anybody who's part of the system, and that in that case, a black police officer. It doesn't really matter what his personal politics are, but if he's there supporting the system that their aim is to dismantle, they'll be there to get in their face.
I look at this yesterday and I wonder how close we are to, and I don't want this, but I feel like we're getting close to kind of that powder keg moment when somebody on the left, because here's the thing, one of these rallies is going to happen in a place where concealed carry is the law of the land, and they're going to put their hands on somebody. Somebody is going to do something violent, and a march against the Second Amendment will proceed afterwards, and I don't want that, but I look at the whole Candace Owens things, and I'm not sure how you feel about it, Ian, but if I'm Candace Owens with my family in that situation, I'm probably going to defend myself at some point before they get into my personal space, And that's going to happen. And I've been saying it for months. I don't want it to happen, but there's nothing coming out of D.C. that leads me to believe it's going to tone itself down. This isn't going to ratchet back or calm itself. And in midterms, when the Democrats don't get their blue wave, there's going to be even more anger coming from the left.
Right. And I'll offer just sort of one word of encouragement on it. Yesterday there were scuffles, there were the sort of violent actions and some very minor vandalism on the part of Antifa, part of some of these groups. In Washington and in other places around the country, we've seen worse. And I don't mean to say that necessarily the threat is abating, but right. We're getting towards the end of the summer here, and we may have gotten off all right. That's sort of my overarching assessment is this whole summer could have gone a lot worse in terms of sort of street violence and sort of street activism. And I think that you bring up a good point. The real frontier of that coming up, I think, is not really the large rally that we think about there, but more what you're talking about there, that sort of individual harassment. In Portland, of course, we had these incidents, not just national figures like Candace Owens, but ICE agents being followed back to their homes by groups of, I don't know whether they consider themselves Antifa or just socialists or abolish ICE protesters, but groups of leftists following ICE agents home, that's disturbing, and I think that's going to be sort of the main crux of street activism coming up.
Hey, Ian, I appreciate the time and actually the narrative of yesterday. A lot of misreporting happening, and I don't appreciate not being able to get the news anymore, other than getting directly in touch with people that were on the ground, and that just feels like the way it's going. So thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
The real thing that the left is angry about is they're like, how could you allow these Russian memes? Somebody saw a meme and then they decided they had to vote for Trump. Or it must have been fake news. And by fake news, they mean conservative websites. Come on. But this is what the left thinks. Fake news. And by fake news, what they mean is shut down Breitbart.
Breitbart News Tonight. Weeknights starting at 9 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125. We want to hear from you. Tweet the show at Garrick38. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Joining me now is John Hayward. He's one of the national security experts at Breitbart. Hey, John, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
When I think about national security and I think about President Trump's Space Force, and they need to come up with a better name, first off, I can't help but think that really is kind of, in no pun intended, the kind of the final frontier for national security for anybody around the globe, because given technology and what we can do from space, and given technology and what we have been able to weaponize, it appears to me that space is the place where you're going to be able to defend, or I guess in a sense almost create a shield over your country that will actually kind of be a real thing. And I'm wondering, I know he's serious. I know President Trump is deadly serious about this, but I wonder how much the rest of the world is in on this. I know I'm curious to know from your perspective. I would imagine China is way into their potential space force or whatever they want to call it.
Oh, absolutely. China and Russia are both very interested in anti-satellite weaponry and disrupting satellite networks, and not just over limited battlefield areas. The attack plans for going after the United States in a major war would definitely include attacking our satellite networks. They're well aware of how both our military and our civilian commerce are heavily dependent on these satellites. So it's not at all unreasonable to take that as a serious threat and then devise the best possible method for defending those satellite networks. And there are different different ways you could do it. You could make a measured critique and say that maybe we don't need a new unified command, although some analysts think that we do, and that that's what President Trump is after here. But all of this has just degenerated into mocking the name of the Space Force as being silly, or making fun of it for something that it isn't. The president isn't talking about sending warships to Mars. He's talking about securing our global satellite network immediately. And I think he's trying to make the point that we're way behind on this, that the adversaries of the United States in their offensive capabilities have gotten well ahead of us in terms of what they can do. And we need to be serious about defending these networks, maybe against the larger conflict to come in a few years. Right. The time to get started and get serious about it is right now.
You and I both understand, I think a lot of people understand, this country relies on being online. And you think about everything from GPS to, I don't even the simplest phone apps are tied to satellites and to data coming from space. And when you think about the fact that you could shut down a country without ever firing a shot on Earth, that has to kind of, I guess, concern people. And all of the technology that we use militarily, from those precision strikes by Tomahawks to guided bombs out of a B-1 and all of the things that we do from a targeting perspective in trying to avoid civilian casualties are because of technology that is up in space. And that is, you can take a picture of a license plate from outer space. I mean, you can pinpoint within inches anywhere on Earth, potentially laser a target. I think there's a much bigger impact on if you talk about interfering or getting in front of somebody's space technology from a military perspective. I mean, the big question for me was EMPs. I think that's going to be the next kind of frontier when you talk about warfare. You could theoretically launch an EMP from outer space and not ever have a missile launch detection on Earth.
Sure. All you need is a satellite with a dirty nuclear warhead sitting inside of it, and it just floats up there in a strategic position until you're ready to detonate it. There could be weapons like that up there now. So we have to be ready for that possibility being used against us. I think back to the World Trade Center attacks. Remember, after 9/11, there were efforts made to tally up the amount of damage that was done in that attack, and it was well north of $1 trillion, as I recall, over the course of the next few years. And a lot of that damage happened because of disrupted communications, because it was the World Trade Center, because of all the financial information that was routed through that area, the tremendous damage that was done on that day. That was nothing compared to what an all-out assault on our satellite networks would produce. The entire country would come to a halt. The damage would be incalculable if they could even shut down the satellite networks for a couple of days. And from a military standpoint, absolutely, the Western way of war, which I think was really rolled out, the new strategy of the American war style in the Gulf War, is highly dependent on precision targeting, on very accurate weapons that minimize civilian casualties, that can target military concentrations to deadly effect. And if you're Chinese or Russian military planners, you're really worried about that because you too have an advanced military and you're highly vulnerable to that level of precision strike, more so than an insurgency, as we've seen, in the years since then. If you're willing to go live in caves and start an insurgency, you can survive the American precision strike campaign, but you can't remain the Chinese or Russian militaries if you're fighting against an adversary with the kind of precision that American weapons have. So stopping that by glitching our satellite and communications networks is really your only strategic countermove.
I can't help but think about the fact that every ounce of our military progression on the battlefield from the last 30, 40 years is all based around technology, and instead of on the ground striking that technology, you basically turn off a satellite in outer space, and nothing more than short-circuiting a satellite in outer space, and the amount of control or leverage you could gain over a nation like ours is got to be prolific and probably, I would imagine, very worrisome to people in the military when you think about our communications and how advanced our communications are based on our assets that are in space. And I would imagine, like I said, I would imagine that a lot of the issues around a ground war with the United States go away when you figure you can shut the United States up with a strike in space. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, what are we talking about financially? Our defense budget is already enormous, but I would imagine that this technology and the progression in this technology is going to be astronomically expensive.
Oh, no doubt. And there's more than just anti-satellite weapons to consider. We also have to get more into the game on artificial intelligence research and on hypersonic technology. That's another huge emerging threat where China and Russia are probably ahead of us, or at the very least equal with us, in hypersonic missiles and planes, which are basically missiles and planes that move so quickly that you can scarcely even detect them, never mind shoot them down. So we've really got to be aware of threats on all of these parameters, and it is going to be expensive. And I think right now what you're seeing is an argument about how to structure the government in order to handle that expense. How should the commands be organized? How should the procurements be done? There are a lot of analysts that are very worried. There was a major speech from a U.S. Air Force general who's in charge of these things recently about how our procurement process is outmoded, it's sloppy, it's too slow, too much money is wasted, the work doesn't get done fast enough. They really want to tighten up the infrastructure that's used to create these modern state-of-the-art weapons so that we can be competitive. And I think they're probably thinking more of China than Russia in the long-term view, because the Chinese are militarizing like crazy. I mean, they've been spending a huge amount of money on getting their military in shape, and I think the fear is that they're spending that money more efficiently than we do. Too much of our resources are wasted on other things, and we've got an enemy here, a potential enemy, that's militarizing, advancing their troops, advancing their tactics, establishing bases around the world, and looking at fighting another new way of war. If you listen to U.S. and NATO analysts, the top people that study these things, they're all saying that the next superpower conflict will be unlike anything else the world has ever seen. If there's ever a fight between the United States and China or Russia, or proxies that are heavily supported by those powers more than what we've seen so far, a direct conflict like that will be a hyperwar, the like of which we've never seen before. Artificial intelligence guiding weapons, cyber warfare, satellites being knocked out, communications being disrupted, attacks on civilian infrastructure. It'll be overwhelming, and it will happen very, very quickly when it happens.
You wrote a really, really good article on this, and the title of the article, guys, is he was talking with Dean Chang on the Space Force. If you don't have space, all those cool weapons we have won't work. It came out. John wrote this, and there's kind of an itemization, a listing of Dean's concerns, and he talks about a couple different points, and his third point is, I won't read the whole thing, but basically the third most scary part is we're behind the eight ball, and I'm wondering, given we've been ahead of the rest of the world on most everything else, are we truly behind the eight ball, or is that kind of maybe a misinformation campaign to make them think we're not as far along as we are? Although, let me check that. Let me ask you this question. We know that President Clinton allowed China access to our ballistic missile technology, which was one of the great tragedies of the 20th century. Did that help them get ahead of us in space from a military perspective or a technology perspective?
Sure, that plus a long history of technology theft. China has been very aggressive about stealing American technology, about forcing Western companies to surrender technological secrets to them as part of the cost of doing business in China. And all of that adds up. I think we are behind the eight ball in those three crucial areas that I just mentioned: artificial intelligence, anti-satellite weaponry, and hypersonics. I think they're at least even with us, or maybe slightly ahead. And it's not a question of what they can do today, but what will they be able to do in 5 years? If you look at the 5-year plan, if you look ahead to 2023, 2025, where will all three of these great powers be? And I think there's a real danger that we're lagging behind them at this point because we haven't put a proper emphasis on the military uses of those things. And when we try to do that, we face problems politically inside the United States. Of course, there's arguments over military spending, to be sure, but also there are high-tech companies out there where the employees or the company management doesn't want to work for the U.S. military. They think it's sinful to take American military contracts. They put on demonstrations. Google had a mass employee demonstration against the idea of doing artificial intelligence work for drone targeting for the United States government. They had employees threatening to quit if they continued doing that kind of work for the U.S. military. Obviously, China and Russia do not have that problem. If the Chinese Communist Party commands artificial intelligent weaponry, the Chinese companies and corporate structures will deliver that on the timetable that they're given. So we're hindered by our politics, by ideology, by maybe our top heaviness of our bureaucracy. And I think by the emphasis that we've put on these things, and the Space Force idea is the beginning of a process of changing the emphasis and making it clear that we have to be ready to fight a new kind of war. It probably isn't going to be anything like the invasion of Iraq the next time we get in a war. It's going to be a more complicated, more fast-moving, more high-tech conflict. We
actually had a period of shows a while back where I tried to explain to people. I read a book, I was pointing to a book called 1 Second After, and there was actually a sequence of books, and it was basically bringing to life an EMP strike on the United States. And I tried to explain to people what an EMP strike would look like in their lives, and I'm not sure people can grasp the fact that an EMP strike could be far more devastating than a tactical nuke, just because you could use an EMP to shut down the nation. And when I say shut down the nation, I mean shut down the nation. When every electronic device in this country stops working, and I don't think people understand, this country goes back to the Stone Age in many ways. If you shut down our access to power and to electricity. We're way past being able to survive on our own, off the grid. That bypassed us a long time ago, and I agree with you. I think that is potentially one of the next battlefields is in a technology aspect, and because basically an EMP allows the infrastructure to survive, but gets rid of the residents. And this is a country I would imagine that would be very attractive to do. And I wonder how far those things have gone, not just here, but I look at the terrorists and how technology and military technology gets into the hands of the wrong people. When the Soviet Union disintegrated, there were a lot of military assets that went into the black market. And you know how you saw us give away access to 20% of our uranium to Soviet interests, and I would imagine there are a lot of other things like that happening on the backdrop that we don't know about.
Well, certainly over the next decade or so, you're going to see a lot more bad actors, developing space capabilities in a serious way. The North Koreans claim to have carried out satellite launches. It's widely thought they were just doing research on ballistic missiles and pretending to launch satellites, but I think they put at least one hunk of junk in orbit for at least a little while, which means they're getting close to having that capability. Iran will probably want satellite launch capability. That technology is going to spread, and I think even more than ballistic missiles, that's a subtle threat. Ballistic missiles are an on-off thing. You either launch them and attack or you don't. Space capabilities, you could put a lot of dangerous stuff in orbit, and it just sits there for a long time until the time comes to hit the button and activate it. The kind of EMP attack that you're talking about that was described in William Forstchen's books, those are the books you're talking about, that could be one device. You detonate one nuclear bomb roughly over the center of the United States at the proper altitude, and you could knock out the entire U.S. communications grid for days or weeks before even the most basic repairs could be made. The damage from that would be unbelievable. It would cripple the U.S. economy. It would take generations to recover from it.
You look at what happened in Puerto Rico after the hurricane, and they're still not back. Just to give you an example, and what John is mentioning is you're talking about crippling the entire grid, not just portions of it. Any car built after, I think, 65 or 66 would not work. I mean, no, there is no generator. You don't have a generator because it's a fascinating and terrifying kind of place to explore. And as I heard about this Space Force, I was really interested in hearing real conversation around this kind of a thing, because since Reagan and Star Wars, I think it's kind of taken this mythological stance, and it's actually, in my opinion, where a lot of resources and research are going these days as we kind of push the envelope to the limit on Earth-based and ground-based weaponry. So anyway, I just wanted to listen. First of all, I appreciate it, John. I really appreciate the insight. I'd love to have you back as this develops, because this is not something that's going to go away quietly. It's going to continue to get stronger, bigger, and more prominent, and not just here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
I'm not sure I've had an easier day picking a loser, and it's not going to be a shocker, not going to be some deeply researched, out of the mainstream thing. Omarosa is my loser, and everything she's done around this whole thing is made her a loser. This is a traitorous woman. I don't think anybody here is going to be shocked that she did what she did. My hope is that they actually proceed with criminal charges, because I'm 100% sure she committed a felony by bringing a recording device into the Situation Room. There's probably a million different laws she broke, and I want to see her prosecuted. How many chances can you give? Think about this. Think about how many opportunities this woman's been given to make a new world for herself, to make a name for herself, and what she's done with it. She's just pissed it away. And how many of you, given her opportunities, wouldn't have gone out and tried to change the world in a way that would help people? She is my loser. My winner, I'm going over to the Diamond, to baseball. My winner is the Boston Red Sox and Chris Sale, that the Red Sox and their postseason issues were directly tied to the health of Chris Sale. I was concerned about the health of Chris Sale and worried because there's no such thing as an inflamed shoulder, by the way. Yesterday, he comes back and throws 5 innings, punches out 12, and looks like the Chris Sale that everybody needs him to look like. And the Red Sox continue to roll on what's going to be a record pace of wins this year. So the Red Sox are my winner. Chris Sale is my winner, and the Red Sox moving forward. All those experts in Boston talking about the Nathan Eovaldi trade as being a bad thing can suck it, because it clearly wasn't. Guys, thanks for tuning in today. You can't miss tomorrow. Charlie Kirk is going to join me tomorrow, and we're going to have our 2A roundtable. Charlie Kirk, and then the 2A roundtable will be tomorrow. You're not going to want to miss that, because I'm going to have to talk with him about the situation in Philadelphia last weekend. Thanks for tuning in, guys. God bless. It's a great day. Catch up with you tomorrow.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
Everything in hip-hop is not bad. Kanye agreed with us, so let's love him today until he raps tomorrow and you turn your back. Because if you jump off when the fun of the moment is over, then you are in fact making Kanye the token he is accused of being. So please, don't do that. Don't go there.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.